Hello and welcome to Monkey Knife Fight Live. Folks, I'm your host, Connor Rowntree, and today I'm joined by Noor Zainab and Nick Whalen. We're talking NBA Finals, specifically Game 5. We're going to run over Game 4. Thoughts on the finals so far, and whatever drip is. I'm going to throw this to Noor first. Noor, Devin Booker and drip. What does that even mean?
You don't know what drip means? Living in Toronto.
I understand
Connor?
I understand the fashion sense of it, but I need to understand what is so specific to Devin Booker and this series.
I think Jason's gonna pull it up for us. So we saw. I'm big on fashion. I love to see my guys like come through the locker room, get ready for their games, and put on the best suits for the game for the fits and everything. And Devin Booker just had this very questionable look put together. I personally was like, this is what I would picture Florida in, like, I don't know, December. That's what he was wearing. And then one of my friends was like, no, it's a really good drip. Like, he looks really great. And I'm like, no, he literally looks like the human embodiment of Hot Wheels. Like, he looks like he's about to yell, Hot Wheels, beat that. Or he's like time traveled from 7 years old to 20 years later. It didn't change out of his clothes from back then. But yeah, that's just my little 2 cents when it comes to the fit of Devin Booker. But he made it up in shooting last game.
I was going to say
points.
It clearly worked because he went off in Game 4. What were your thoughts on Game 4 as a whole, Noor?
I think that was kind of how I would wanted this series to go. I wanted it to be a little bit closer. You wanted to see, a little bit more closer towards the end. I think we had seen close games all throughout the series, but you don't really get that really, really edge of your seat kind of thing until you find that in the fourth quarter. And we hadn't seen that until last game. Big. I think Bucks really were able to get away with it because Chris Paul had a really, really bad game. His turnovers, we can get into that later, but that cost them big time. I think Devin had a really fantastic game, right? He had 42 points. He can make sure that he came through for his team and nobody else did. And Devin Booker can go 42 points, but if the rest of his teammates can go over 15 points, they're not going to win against Giannis and Chris Middleton. It's not going to happen. And Chris Middleton had a fantastic game last one, right? I mean, he didn't shoot that well. I want to say he was 15 of 33, and I believe 2 of 8 or something like that, from 2s and 3s. But regardless of that, he came through when he needed to. And I think it was towards the very end of the fourth quarter when he outscored the Suns by 10-2 or 10-4, I believe. And he pulled it together for the Bucks. Giannis didn't really have the aggressive game that he needed to have, but he didn't need to do that because Chris Middleton did. But that Giannis block also was just like, I think we're gonna think about it for time to come. So is Ayton. So is the rest of the world. It was crazy.
Yeah, no, that was one of the craziest sequences that we've ever seen. Jason and I were talking about it before we went on air. But something to note: 17 turnovers for the Suns, I believe it was. Nick, how are the Bucks able to force those turnovers and able to capitalize on them?
They were a lot more aggressive defensively. We saw a couple runouts for guys like Holiday and Giannis. I think had one where they're actually playing passing lanes a little bit more aggressively than they were early on. I think defensively they kind of eased into this series, I think I wouldn't say scared, but we're kind of letting Chris Paul and Devin Booker dictate how things went in the half court, and it feels like that's completely flipped now in games 3 and 4, where you have Drew Holiday picking up Chris Paul or picking up Devin Booker 75 feet from the basket. You have a really physical defender in PJ Tucker who can kind of switch and guard both of those guys. He spent more time on Devin Booker in game 4, and you're willing to let him pick up 5 or 6 fouls. And, a couple of those were pretty egregious, fouling the arm of the shooter, pretty costly, but you're willing to give a few of those up to make those guys uncomfortable. And I think they really succeeded, especially in doing that to Chris Paul. And some of Chris Paul's turnovers were completely unforced. Obviously there was the big one at the end where, he was kind of looking to split a double team, and then the double team backed off and he just got his feet tangled essentially and went down. So, some of those turnovers are forced by the Bucks, and some of them are just Phoenix, kind of losing control of the ball. I tweeted early in game 4 that it looked to me, and anyone who I think has played basketball, even at like the high school or middle school level, would get this. Like, if you've ever lifted weights and then tried to play basketball right after, it's just like you just can't do it. Like the proportions are off. The ball feels like it's either really heavy or really light. And Chris Paul, especially, like, that's what it felt like throughout the night. Like, he's dribbling the ball up the court, and it's almost like the ball had like a little bulge in it, and it would just like go to the right all of a sudden. And he just couldn't really get control. I don't know if there's an injury. We'll see. You know, it wouldn't shock me if after game 6 or 7 we find out that he's been dealing with a wrist issue or an arm issue or something with that shoulder that he injured early on. But man, the Bucks did such a good job of making Chris Paul uncomfortable. And it reminded me, it was kind of the converse of game 2, where Giannis showed up, had that big 40 and 10 game, and the Bucks got nothing from anybody else. You know, for Phoenix, Devin Booker had arguably his best game of the entire playoffs, and they got almost nothing from the other guys.
Getting into game 5 and looking at the stat line, you see 28.5 for Devin Booker. That's been pretty consistent. Jay and I were talking about that before the show. That's been pretty consistent throughout this postseason. Do you think he can eclipse that line? Because now we've seen him go way under it with 10 points. We've seen him absolutely smash it with 42 points. What happens in the next game? And Noor, what's your opinion on that?
I think just given Devin Booker's trajectory and the way that he's been handling himself, he did get injured, and we did talk about previously about how that might have been a factor in him not being able to score as well as he had been. I think we are seeing a difference in that a little bit, that he is getting more aggressive. The fact that he was able to have a game like this last game and he barely had anybody else giving him anything, and they brought it down to the last 2 minutes of the game, that speaks a lot to me. And I think that that kind of momentum he will bring into the game tomorrow. Being at home is going to help. I don't want to add the extra factors, but I do think being at home and having the crowd behind you helps. Suns haven't lost many games at home yet. They've only lost 2 games this postseason, and neither of the teams currently has lost any home games. They've all won at home. So I think if you really are riding that wave, you can give that little edge to Devin. So I think, and Monkey Knife Fight has done such a good job at just looking at how they've been averaging the past couple of games, because literally on the point, like I would say probably 28, 29 points for Devin Booker for sure, because that's how much he's been averaging the past couple of games.
Nick, how do you see Devin Booker's game going? And Noor had a great point. He's going back to Phoenix, and the home teams have obviously been the dominant force in this series.
Yeah, I mean, you look at games 1 and 2 in Phoenix, he had 27 and he had 31. So kind of right in the middle of that is where this line falls. It's so tough. I mean, I would feel wrong saying like, I know for sure he's going over, or I know for sure he's going under, because like Noor said, you know, this line is right where it needs to be. And he probably comes in within 2 points one way or the other. You know, part of me is inclined to kind of bet on a little bit of regression after game 4, just because of, if you watch that game, like the shot making was absurd. Like almost every single one of Booker's buckets was extremely contested.
Yeah, he shot over 60% from the field. So that's just great. That's point blank.
Right. And again, based on the shot quality, I mean, it's just, some of those are unsustainable. You know, you're watching the slow motion replay and he's, you know, kind of fading to the right, and Drew Holiday's arm is, you know, as high as it can be. His hand is in his face. Doesn't matter. It felt like he made every single one of those mid-rangers. So there should be some regression there. But at the same time, he's 0 of 3 from 3-point range. He had 7 3-pointers at home in game 2. So there's maybe an argument that, you know, maybe he misses 3 or 4 of those really difficult mid-rangers, but he probably makes a 2 or 3 3-pointers in this game, shooting more comfortably at home. I'm going to go over because what we saw from Chris Paul in game 4 is concerning. You know, chances are he will bounce back from that, but it wasn't like Chris Paul had a game where he was like 3 of 20 from the field and just couldn't get anything to go. It was, I'm going to stand in the corner. I'm going to let Campaign bring the ball up. I'm going to let Devin Booker bring the ball up. I don't know if it's fatigue. I don't know if it was just an off night. I don't know what it was, but the way in which he disappeared, I think was more concerning. You would rather have a guy have a Drew Holiday game where at least he's taking 20 shots. He's attempting to be aggressive. Like Chris Paul made no attempt to make an imprint on this game, especially in the second half.
Well, I think it's very interesting that you each are going with the more for Devin Booker. You know, Noor's taking it with the emotions being at home. Nick, you're basing it more on the play around him. And again, you said regression, but regression from 42 points is still probably going to break 29. So I think you guys both really hit the nail on the head there, and I'm going to follow suit and go with more on that. But looking at Giannis, 32.5 points is another interesting line because we've seen him obviously go well over that. And then last game, we saw him really take in that more of a team role, 26 points and that massive block. So we'll throw this one to you, Noor. How do you think Giannis does on the road in game 5?
I think we've established this in the past couple episodes, right? Giannis can eat if he wants to. If he wants to have a really aggressive board game where he's attacking the rim and he's making sure that his imprints being felt shooting wise, he can do that easily if he needs to, because there's not a lot of people on the Suns that can stop him. I think what we saw last game from Giannis is more of a laid back Giannis who allowed Middleton to kind of go off. Middleton had 33 shots. He took 8 from 3 points. I think Giannis had maybe he attempted 2 points from the 3-point range. He had maybe 20 to 18. I haven't really looked it up properly, but I think he had like 18 to 20 field goals. So he really did take a seat back and he let Middleton have it. And, because of that, they did end up winning the game. I think tonight we see a more aggressive Giannis because you can't chalk it up to Middleton having another 40-point game this series. I don't really see that happening. It was great. He did that last game. I just don't see it happening again. So I think tomorrow night is going to have to be Giannis's night to kind of take that Batman role all over again. So again, it's the easiest thing for Giannis is to have 30 points in this series. He can do that, just sitting on the other end of the court. So I think for him, I'm definitely going to go over.
Well, based on what you said there, Noor, before we just throw this to Nick, it seems like they're going to be on the road, and it seems that the Bucks are going to need Giannis to step up and play better. Nick, what's your take on that, and how do you see his more or less of the 32.5 points?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think Milwaukee is lucky to win that game with Giannis playing the way he did. And, this comes with the caveat that Giannis still had 26, 14, and 8 with 3 steals, 2 blocks, one of those being, potentially an all-time finals moment if Milwaukee wins this series, although they didn't replay it for like 15 minutes on the live telecast, which was bizarre. But he eased his way into this game. It was the complete opposite from games 2 and 3, where, he came out extremely aggressively, almost to a fault at times, where he's just kind of driving into a crowd, getting caught in the air, having to kind of throw it out there. But he eased into this game. He looked tired early on. That's something that's kind of been an issue on and off for him. And I think he just never quite caught his wind at any point. So for the Bucks to win that game with Giannis not really being his full self was huge. And I think Noor's right. I think he bounces back in a major way. And again, it's not like he had 10 points in game 4, but I think we're getting a little bit of a discount on this line at 32.5. I mean, if that's the game that we saw from Giannis, where it felt like he was being passive, and he was, I keep bringing up potential assists on the show. He had 20 potential assists in this game. That's by far the highest of any player at any game in this series. So, he was doing a lot more dribbling in and facilitating than he was shooting. I think that completely turns on his head. I think he could have 8 or 9 more field goal attempts in this game than he had in game 4. And honestly, I mean, only 8 free throw attempts in that game. Obviously could have had more. There were a couple questionable calls in that game. He was passing the ball late, under 3 minutes. Giannis did not want the ball in his hands. And I actually thought that was smart, because I think Phoenix was going to foul him right away. I think if he took 1 step toward the basket, they were just going to wrap him up and send him to the line, basically banking that he's maybe going to make 1. And he did a good job of kind of just, if the ball was in his hands, get it to Chris Middleton, get it to Drew Holiday, get it to someone who, when they're fouled, is going to make those free throws. So I think he could have actually had a little bit of a higher point total in game 4, and maybe that ends up affecting this line. So bottom line, you're getting a discount on Giannis. I would go over on 32.5.
Well, Monkey Knife Fighters, you heard it here, folks. Heard it here first. Oh my goodness. Did you just hear that? Holy guacamole. You heard it here first. There it is.
Holy
Get that
guacamole.
blooper reel, Jason. Get that blooper reel.
Both of our analysts are taking more on the 2 superstars. So make sure you head over to Monkey Knife Fight. And if you like what our analysts were projecting there, you can punch in whatever you feel comfortable with. Scroll down to the bottom. You'll see your prize amount. Hit submit, and you are in to win. A couple other interesting factors coming into the next game. Drew Holiday had 7 assists in game 4. If Giannis is meant to go off in this game, Noor, do you think Holiday's assist line rises? Because it's 7.5 going into game 5. He had 7 in game 4, as we said. How do you think he does? How do you think he fares in game 5?
Again, you guys make my job so hard. 7.5 is a great place for Middleton again. He's been averaging 9-7, 9-7 all series, literally putting him right at the stable of 8.5. So, but I think what we've seen from Middleton is when he's not about to be aggressive for shooting, he makes sure that unlike Chris Paul last game, he makes sure that his imprint is still felt in the series. He makes sure that he comes through with assists any way that he has to. I think that's one thing that the Bucks do rely on him for. They do rely on that spacing and that ball movement for him. So I don't think that, as much as they would like to see, obviously, see Drew shoot, they do believe that he probably has to be the number one facilitator. So I think in that regard, because of the onus on him to make that movement, I would probably give it to him to go over.
Drew Holiday. There you go. More on Monkey Knife Fight. Nick, how do you see that playing out? Obviously, you said Giannis is going to look good. How do you like him to be?
I think he probably goes over. I think this line is a little bit generous. I think it's been closer to 8.5, and maybe even 9.5 early in the series. But he sat in that 9-7 range, like Noor said, every single game. 7 has basically been the baseline for Drew Holiday. He hasn't had fewer than 7 assists in any game since Game 6 against the Brooklyn Nets. So it's been an extremely high floor. And more often than not, he's gone over 7. So all you need is for him to get to 8. He only had 14 potential assists in Game 4, converted 7 of those. That's about the average rate that you'd expect. But I would also expect him to have more potential assists in Game 5, probably take fewer shots. I mean, he was, again, 4 of 20 from the field. Just like, honestly, one of the worst individual offensive performances of all time in the NBA Finals. I looked up the list. There were only like 6 other guys who've taken at least 20 shots in a finals game and shot 25% or fewer. Kobe did it twice, for the record, not surprising. But he was in rarefied air in terms of guys who've taken that many shots and missed that many shots. So I think I always wonder, like, what's happening in the team meeting, or what's happening at practice today? Does Mike Budenholzer say, like, hey, you went 4 of 20, man, like, back off? Or is it keep shooting, it's going to come? Because it sure seems like it's been the latter with Drew Holiday, because he, even though he's had these games, he just keeps on going. And in some ways that's admirable. In some ways, as someone who's rooting for the Bucks, it's like, how about we distribute those to Giannis and Middleton instead? It was clear 3 minutes into the game that you didn't have it. And he took 17 more shots on the way out. So, I mean, that's a little bit ancillary to the passing. And we keep harping on the Bucks shooting throughout this series. They were 7 of 29 from 3 in this game. I think at one point they were like 3 of 16. It feels like they start off every game in this massive hole from 3, and then eventually, they'll hit a couple. Pat Connaughton had a couple big ones late, but we're still kind of waiting for that 3-point barrage game from Milwaukee. And that I keep saying this, but that is the easiest way for guards to rack up assists. It's just, whether it's a driving kick or just a swing to the corner, if the Bucks shooters start to knock down their open threes, that's when the assists pile up. I don't know if that happens on the road. It's a lot to ask. But at the same time, Drew Holiday has such a high floor in terms of his passing that at 7.5, I think I have to go over.
Nick, the list that you referenced, it's not a bunch of scrubs. It's Pippen, Kobe, Kenyon Martin, Kobe, again, Westbrook, Curry, and Holiday. It's probably the most elite company Holiday's ever been in.
Well, yes, but at the same time, like you also have to be on a certain level to take 20 shots in an NBA Finals game.
Sure.
It's like, Raymond Felton's not going to be on that list. And also, like, sidebar, Kenyon Martin, like I was 9 years old, or like 10 years old, I guess, at the time of this game. What happened? Like, did Tim Duncan just like completely shut him down? Like, how does Kenyon Martin? It's not like he missed a ton of threes. Like, all of his looks had to be within like six feet of the basket.
I need to find which game it was. In the meantime,
yeah, please do.
Everything good back there, Connor? I think Connor's dog is acting up in the background.
Yeah, as I was talking, I saw a lot of like looking over the shoulder, like, is somebody
burglarizing
your apartment?
Yeah.
Or maybe Nick, your
like,
take was so outlandish. How dare you insult the great Kmart from when you were 9 years old?
Dude, 3 of 23. Imagine if that happened today. Like, he'd be out of the league.
Yeah, all right. In the meantime, we'll just hold over until Connor gets back. We're going to go on a little adventure and find which... Do you know which Spurs-Nets games this was?
It was a deciding game. It was
look at the scores, by the way. 77-76.
Yeah, it was Game 6.
Wow.
So he did that in a game that literally lost them the finals.
Wow. I guess his entire legacy changes if he goes like 17 of 23.
I mean, if he goes like 6 of 23, maybe they win and we're playing a Game 7.
Yeah, it was 3 of 23. Oh, wow.
They were leading this game by 6 points entering the fourth quarter and lost by 11 in a deciding Game 6 of the NBA Finals.
That's impressive. Shout out Kerry Kittles.
Sorry about that, everybody.
And Rodney Rogers.
Malik Rose must have had him in the torture chamber.
The census of Canada just came knocking on my door, and my dog was having none of it. Yeah. So
Yeah, tell him to get lost.
Yeah, I have to
Like,
fill
don't
this
you know
out.
I'm working for Monkey Knife Fight right now?
Yeah, no, the guy was like, "Can you just fill this out right now?" I was like,
Really?
"I'm literally working. Give me 2 hours." Anyway, DeAndre Ayton, have we touched on that yet? Because
No.
he obviously he's gonna have some emotions going into Game 5 after that huge block that Giannis put on him. 13 and a half rebounds. That's been about his wheelhouse this playoff series or this playoff run. Noor, how do you see this going in Game 5?
You're about to call me Zainab, weren't you?
Yep.
I heard. We all saw it. Nice save, Connor. It's all good. You know what? I think the fact that you just mentioned the block from Giannis, I think if it hadn't been for that, I don't know. I think I'm still gonna go over because it's DeAndre Ayton. They don't really have anybody else to cater to his minutes and make sure that they have the same length going. Obviously, in terms of Giannis, Dario is not there anymore, so the onus again just falls on Ayton. But the one thing that does concern me is that block. I know they're NBA players. I know that they have to put their emotions aside, but from what we've seen, Ayton is kind of sensitive, and he is still really young. And this is his first playoffs, right? It's his first moment to be where he is supposed to be. So I'm just hoping that he's talking to the right people and able to turn that around and be aggressive and kind of use that as motivation to go harder the next game, right? But yeah, that does concern me a little bit just because it is kind of wonky just given how Ayton is and who he is and his being his first playoffs. But like I said, he is the length of the Suns right now. They don't have anybody else. And he has to be aggressive. They are still at home. They're moving that stuff around. And if he has the momentum going for him, I don't see why he wouldn't have anything like that. He's been averaging around 14 rebounds this series. Like I said, you guys have been doing a great job over here, making my life hard, but I think he's probably goes over 13.5 for sure. Yeah.
Nick, how do you see DeAndre Ayton's performance on the glass in Game 5?
Man, I'm for some reason I want to say under. I don't know. 17. It's a little reactionary. You know, you see the way that he rebounded in Game 4. I mean, as an aside, I've just been extremely impressed with, you know, the caliber of the rebounds that he's pulling down. Like if you watch these games, it's not like he's just, you know, standing there and getting these uncontested rebounds after a free throw. Like he is going into a crowd and pulling down, you know, 2-on-1 type of rebounds like routinely. I mean, it's unbelievable for a guy who, you know, a lot of people questioned his motor, a lot of people questioned his strength, you know, his want to go and do things like that. Like he's kind of turned into this guy who can have 6 points in a finals game and still be a major factor. You know, it was somewhat of a disappearing act on offense, but 5 assists, that was a career high or tied a career high, and then 17 rebounds. You know, a lot of guys would, you know, if you're not really getting the ball, you're not involved in the pick and roll, a lot of guys would shut it down. But to still be running in there for rebound after rebound after rebound the entire game has been really impressive. So, you know, I'm not really concerned about his motor. At some point, though, it just becomes, you know, a game of opportunity. And, you know, Milwaukee didn't shoot the ball overly well in Game 4. But they also didn't turn it over much at all. And you know, there were a ton of rebounding opportunities in that game. You could make the argument, of course, on the other side too, where the Suns, I think, had 17 turnovers. So maybe there's more offensive rebounding opportunities, assuming that more shots are getting on the rim. But I want to go under. You know, I think you look at Game 3 of this series, only had 9 rebounds in that one. And part of it was he was in foul trouble. The game was over, you know, midway through the fourth quarter. So he didn't play as many minutes. But before that, 11 rebounds in 42 minutes in Game 2. I think this plays out closer to that, where he's a little bit more effective on offense and he's not focusing pretty much all of his effort on the glass. So I think Ayton probably comes in somewhere in like the 10 to 12 range in terms of rebounds. So let's have a little disagreement. I'll go under.
More or less than 7.5 fouls for Devin Booker in Game 5.
We need to touch on that. Like, I know it's become a joke, but has there been a more, you know, I guess a more egregious like no call in that situation? Like the funniest part was like Mike Breen, who's like the biggest like stand-up guy of all time and so professional, was even like, he fouled him and they didn't call it. Like it was I'm like everybody was just stunned. Like, how is this not a foul? And I mean, luckily Giannis, I think it was Giannis, right, who like swooped in and laid it in. But man, if that hadn't happened, like imagine if Phoenix gets the rebound there and goes down and hits a 3.
I think Book got super lucky that at that point Chris Paul had that turnover, because I don't think if Chris Paul had that turnover, we would be having a whole different conversation right now. It would not be about Chris Paul. It would be about Devin Ayton.
It's just
Jesus.
It's so
crazy.
He's bear hugging him. He's literally giving him a hug.
He's tackling him midair. This is
Well,
not
speaking of
football.
Chris Paul, we've been talking about him. He was a bit of a storyline, just a little bit, especially with that turnover towards the end of the game. Nor, his line on Monkey Knife Fight is 8.5 assists. How do you see that playing out in game 5? Do you see him going for more or less?
I know he had a pretty nasty game last game. It's not the Chris Paul that we imagined, but I also think Chris Paul was kind of due a bad game. I know we've been saying that he's due a double assist game, a double-digit assist game. But I also think just given his age and everything and the fatigue that the team is probably going through, they've made it to the finals. This is the longest Chris Paul has played in the NBA ever in his career. So I think a part of that is also just fatigue that played in the last game. But I think he still had 7 assists, right? Like his teammates did not do much at all. It was just Devin Booker who was going off at 42 points. The rest of them had, Chris Paul had 15 points himself, but the rest of them had less than 15, right? So again, one or two of them make another shot that Chris Paul has facilitated. He gets his 8 to 9 assists, and 8.5 is again really generous for someone like Chris Paul. I don't know if he gets into a double-digit game tomorrow. I think for assists, I think tomorrow his priority might be to make sure that he goes off for shooting. He probably is going to want to bounce back from having a terrible game by his standards. Because I think if anything happens this series, and if the Suns end up losing the series, it's probably going to end up falling on Chris Paul for that turnover in that game, because I would have changed everything afterwards. So I think he's going to look at that. He's going to try to be more aggressive and try to make his aggressiveness show on the scoreboard through scoring, through the paint, through the 3-pointers. And at the same time, his assists are never going to not be there. That's just like second nature to him. He makes sure that his teammates are going off whenever they can. And like I mentioned, they did not have a great game last game. So I can only assume that going forward tonight, he'll have a pretty good assist game. A little Nick, if that wasn't clear.
Yeah, we're with you there, Noor. Nick, how do you see game 5 going for Chris Paul in the Suns backcourt?
If we're talking Chris Paul scoring props, I would stay away from it. We don't know what he's going to look like. Like I said earlier, it was just the way that he disappeared from that game was a little concerning. But, one thing you can take solace in is he still had 7 assists. It was like one of the worst playoff games of his entire career. 5 turnovers. He very quietly has 15 turnovers over the last 3 games, by the way. But, he played 37 minutes, was doing a lot of standing around, just wasn't involved, still found his way into 7 assists on a night when the Suns role players shot terribly. They didn't even take that many threes. They were only 7 of 23 from 3-point range. So, Chris Paul has a way to, even when he's not feeling it as a scorer, he can still affect the game as a passer. So it feels like this line, is maybe a little bit adjusted for how poorly he played in the last game. But much like Jrue Holiday, he's basically been in that 7 to 11 or 12 range every single game dating back to like really the beginning of the playoffs. He's been even more consistent than Holiday. And so if you look at game 4 as like his absolute bottom out, like can't really play worse than that game, and he still had 7 assists, I would feel pretty good about him probably playing a few more minutes. He only played 37. I wouldn't be surprised if they extend him to 40, 41 at home in a super important game that if you lose, you're not feeling great about going back to Milwaukee for game 6. The fact that he played poorly and still got to 7 makes me feel good about his chances to get to 9 or 10 on Wednesday night. Saturday night. What am I talking about?
Don't worry. There's people knocking on my door. My dog's going ballistic. I'm calling Noor Miss Zane, apparently. So we're all over the place today, but we're still making it work. But just have to touch on one thing. Nick, what did you think of the audience in game 4?
Man, I mean, what can you say about the audience inside and outside of the stadium? The audience has been fantastic. I was actually in the audience at the Deer District for one of the Hawks games. It happened to be the game that Giannis got hurt. So it was super depressing. And honestly, I was like, okay, this is fine. There's a lot of kids here. There's a lot of people vaping here. Like it's all right. The Deer District has stepped it up big time in the finals. Like it was a fun scene for the Eastern Conference Finals, but it feels like they've doubled the amount of people there. They've doubled the amount of like EDM music that's playing. There's fireworks going off. There's beer being sold.
It does actually sound like an audience at that point. It sounds like a concert audience. I will say, to Noor's defense.
That's what I thought.
I've never actually really been to a concert. Okay, is it called an audience?
That's a crowd.
That's a crowd.
That's definitely that's a crowd. That's bumping. That place is going off right there.
Yeah, that is not. Do we ever put it on the poll, by the way? What were the results? Like 90,
like
99 to 1?
We will put it on the poll for tomorrow or today in the clip where people can finally vote on is an audience a crowd or a crowd.
Can I also send you screenshots of Urban Dictionary that sends you the definition of each so that people
I don't think Urban Dictionary is a credible source.
Urban Dictionary absolutely is a credible sourse. It is the only dictionary.
Put that on the poll too. Is Urban Dictionary a credible source?
That's about as credible as Wikipedia. And
I'm going to set the line.
Go on there and change that.
2.5% of people over under will say that audience is the wrong term.
I think a lot of people might just agree with Noor.
I was just going to say, you guys are really underestimating my influence. So we'll see. I don't know.
Well, we'll see how Chris Paul does on Saturday. The assists, both of our analysts are thinking more for Chris Paul. Another great show here on Monkey Knife Fight. Thank you so much for joining us. Folks, I'm Connor Rowntree, and remember to hit it hard. Hello and welcome back to Monkey Knife Fight Live. Now we're talking a little bit of UFC action for Saturday night. It's Makhachev versus Moises, and we are joined by AJ from AJ MMA Bets. AJ, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Connor. Super excited to talk about UFC Vegas 31, and we're coming off an awesome pay-per-view event. This isn't obviously as compelling from a name value perspective. However, it's another card we could look forward to. You have UFC fight nights, and there's plenty of opportunities to go out there and play some, make some money. So,
well, one huge name coming back is Miesha Tate. But before we get to that, what were your thoughts on Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier at UFC 264?
Yeah, pretty anticlimactic ending, but it looked as though the tide was definitely in Poirier's favor. I'm not ready to say that he for sure would have won had the fight go on, because we have a similar instance, a couple pay-per-views cards ago where Chandler dominated the first round against Charles Oliveira. Oliveira came back and won the second round. So you can never say for sure that had it gone on, Dustin was 100% guaranteed to win. However, he was really landing some ground and pound on Conor there. And, he was even boxing him up a bit. So I don't know if we're going to see a fourth fight. I would be happy if we did, but I don't feel like it's necessary at this point. But as far as the result goes, Poirier's stock goes up, and Conor McGregor is just too big to fail, if you will, in this business. His stock doesn't go down, in my opinion. I think that win, lose, or draw, he is always must-see TV.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right on the head there. Poirier looked great in the first round. Conor looked decent on the feet. He even touched him up a bit on his back, but obviously Poirier looked very good. Habib even said, one of the judges had it at a 10-8. Conor said later this week, or I guess earlier this past week, but later after the fight, that he said he had some fractures in his bone going into the fight, and that the UFC can confirm that. So in that leg bone. So there's a bunch of different factors in the air. And I think the most important thing to take away from it is that hopefully Dustin Poirier gets that title shot, because I think against Oliveira, I think that's a great fight for him. Obviously, he's the big, strong guy with great boxing, and he looked great on the feet against McGregor, as you alluded to. And as for Conor, his stock doesn't go anywhere, as you said. Yes, it is a loss, but I mean, his leg gave out on him. It's not a loss that he was literally throwing a punch. It's not even as if it was a checked kick happening in the moment. So I think exactly you hit the nail on the head. It's exactly where it is. But now we get another lightweight prospect. We got Islam Makhachev, probably the next big thing to happen in the lightweight division. Obviously has ties with Habib Nurmagomedov, longtime champion. AJ, what are your thoughts on Islam and the future of the UFC lightweight division?
I think he has the potential to be the champion, to be honest with you. I mean, people might glance at his resume and say, well, who has he fought? I mean, but you can't, I never want to discredit a guy or fighter in general based on who they fought. They could only fight who they're put in front of. To me, the skill level of fighter is the most compelling thing when analyzing how good they are. And this guy has absolutely just dominated every fight that he's been put in front of. He got knocked out in under 2 minutes by Adriano Martins. But that's the type of result that I think it takes to beat a guy like Makhachev. He is so dominant with his wrestling. Once he gets you on the ground, his top control is excellent. His guard passing, he's an excellent submission grappler. He's not as aggressive as, say, Habib is with the ground and pound, but he does have some ground and pound. And he's just got such a dominant style on the feet. He's not the best striker in the division, but he is an improving striker. And what I love about Makhachev is he limits pocket exchanges by not throwing in combination often, just sticking to the outside, throwing one shot at a time. And as a result, he absorbs a ridiculously low amount of significant strikes per minute, below one, with excellent defense. And so it's just very difficult to beat this guy, land offense on him. So he does have all the makings to be a champ. We saw him hurt by Martins. He was actually buckled briefly by Ramos, but unless if he gets knocked out, this guy's going to not only win fights, but go out there and dominate. I think that win that he has against Arman Tarukian aged tremendously well. And I think that's going to age even better as time goes on. So I think that he has the potential to be champ, and he, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go on a win streak here and have a title run.
Well, he arguably has his toughest test on Saturday night in Thiago Moises, big, strong lightweight. Looking at their fantasy, looking at their strike lines on Monkey Knife Fight. Pardon me, Thiago Moises started out at 51.5 fantasy, or at 51.5 strikes, up to 71.5 on Monkey Knife Fight. Let's touch on him first. How do you think this fight goes for Thiago Moises? Because for me, I think he's going to be trying to chase Islam Makhachev down a lot. You said Islam is very good at keeping guys to the outside, and we saw Ismagulov really dominate Thiago Moises with a mixture of striking and grappling. And I think Makhachev is just a more well-rounded and more developed, better version of Ismail Gulov. So I think Makhachev really dominates this fight, and I don't see Moises being able to get out 71 strikes.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. For him to land 71 strikes, he has to keep the fight upright in all likelihood. Of course, he could land some ground strikes from his back, but I just don't see him landing a sufficient amount to do so. I mean, I think Makhachev's going to ground him, put him on his back, and Moises is going to try and scramble off of his back, but be largely unsuccessful. Moises, I've been higher on him than most. I honestly think he's a talented prospect. He trains an American Top Team. I think he's a good striker. Technically, he's got some pop. He's a very good submission grappler, but in order for him to win this fight, I think he has to keep it upright long enough to find the knockout shot. And it's possible. Like we said, he's got power. Makhachev has been dinged a few times in the past, but what's more likely to happen here, I think, is Makhachev's going to find the takedowns. We saw Moises taken down several times by Beneil Dariush. He's a great fighter, but was still able to keep him on his back for several minutes in a 3-round fight. He was taken down a couple times by Kurt Hollabaugh. He was taken down a couple times by Bobby Green. And I do consider Islam Makhachev a better wrestler than all of those opposition that Moises struggled with in the past. So when I look at that total, the 51.5 honestly was more intriguing. I was looking at the over there, partly because I think this fight probably does go 5 rounds. I even though I think Makhachev goes out here and dominates, I struggle to see him finishing Moises, but the 71.5 actually wants me to go under, because like we talked about, if he's not going to be on the feet for that long period of time, and even if he is, Makhachev's just so good defensively and he's stuck on his back, even if it does go 5 rounds, I really like the chance that goes under the 71.5 strike mark.
Yeah, and that was one thing I wanted to touch on too, AJ, because I'm right there with you. Moises has gone the distance in 5 out of his last 6 fights, and that one he finished with it was, I believe, an arm lock or an ankle lock, and it was a submission against Michael Johnson. So he has the durability and he has the cardio to go along. As for Makhachev, 129 strikes, I don't see him. I do know it's a 5-round fight. He's going to be on top. He's going to be looking for the ground and pound to, I think, assert that part of his game. But 130 strikes is a lot of strikes. And I don't see his style with the grappling and the hanging on and looking for the submission game. I don't see him getting to the 130. How do you see his strike line playing out on Monkey Knife Fight?
I actually do think it goes over here, man. I just think that when we talk about a guy, even though I said he's not as aggressive as Habib with the ground and pound, he still does land a lot of ground and pound. In his last fight against Drew Dober, that didn't even go past the 12.5-minute mark. He landed a little bit over 100 strikes. And like we talked about last event, man, I mean, this scoring system, you don't need significant strikes. It's just total strikes. And we got a guy that's going to probably get top position here and have his way. There are opportunities here to land a lot of ground strikes. I was looking at Moises' stats when he fought Beneil Dariush, and he was grounded there for several minutes. Dariush landed a bunch of ground strikes on him as well, over 100. So when you tack on an extra 2 rounds, and if we think that this fight probably goes long, that just creates more opportunity for Islam to land those strikes. So I actually do like the over on Islam, and I do like the under on Moises for the strike count.
Well, there it is, folks. AJ MMA bets. He likes the more and he likes the less for the main event. Head on over to Monkey Knife Fight and you can check out your picks there. You can see your buy-in and you can see what your prize would be. Scroll down to the bottom and all you have to do is hit submit. Now, one of my favorite fighters of all time on my female Mount Rushmore, it is Miesha Tate. I love Miesha Tate. My female Mount Rushmore, by the way, you got Ronda Rousey, Miesha Tate. I love Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And then I think Amanda Nunes now, just because of where she's taken the level of women's mixed martial arts. But getting into this fight on Saturday night, you got 2 veterans of the game. Miesha Tate's line at 69.5 strikes. Renault at 45.5. Love a comeback story in Miesha Tate, obviously. Where's your mind at in this fight, AJ? Because believe it or not, although she hasn't been active, Miesha is the younger of these two ladies. And I think this fight, co-main event, I think it does go long. And I think we do see a flurry of strikes. So I like Miesha to go for more on this. Where's your head at in this co-main event?
It's a really tricky fight to break down because, like you said, we haven't seen Miesha in about 4.5 years. The last card she actually fought on was the first UFC event I watched from start to finish. So it's crazy to see her out here again. But good for her. I mean, she's in the meantime, she gave birth to a child. She's a key player in ONE FC. She's been doing a lot of things, and she seems really rejuvenated to fight again, which I love to see. Stylistically, it's a good fight for her because she's a better wrestler, and Renault does not have good takedown offense. And so in theory, Miesha could land takedowns here and just keep Renault on her back and just kind of win rounds that way, similar to how Kat Zingano did a few years ago. But the issue though becomes, is it the same Miesha Tate that we're used to seeing from 4.5+ years ago? And that's a big question to be had. I mean, again, she seems focused, but it's one thing. I don't always like to overreact to interviews. I mean, it's nice to hear some of this stuff, but I mean, you hear fighters say time and time again, they're going to do one thing when they talk about the interview, when they're addressing the press, and then they go out there and fight completely differently. I've seen that she's training at Extreme Couture. That's a great camp to get fired up and ready to go. Renault, as you said, this is her, retirement fight. She's on the way out. She's the older fighter here. So in a way, Tate is getting a very reasonable stylistic matchup for her to excel. It just then becomes, is she anything like we're used to seeing? And that I don't have the answer to. So we're kind of taking a guess here. I do like your angle on the fight probably goes long. That would be my lean as well. They're both super tough. And I think that they both hit that over mark. I think Renault could land some strikes on the feet. Renault is the better striker, in my opinion. Tate is moderately hittable. And if we think Tate could land takedowns here, she can rack up those ground strikes, like we pointed out with Makhachev, from the top position. So I do generally like the over on both metrics there.
Yeah, and I think to your point as well, I think Renault, I think their striking is pretty on par. But the thing is, right, anyone that takes time away from the cage, if you've seen it all, it takes time to get your timing back in there. So obviously Renault, I think, will have a boxing advantage on the feet from that perspective, but I do think Miesha Tate will be able to take her down. Renault's lost 4 straight fights, and all of them had gone to distance. So I do think this fight will go long, and for that, I do think we take the more as well. I'm glad we're in the same ballpark with that one because that makes me feel good. You want to hear a funny Miesha Tate story? So you said your last Miesha Tate, so her last fight was the first card that you ever watched. So that was the Raquel Pennington fight, I believe. So I was at UFC 229, McGregor versus Conor, or McGregor versus Habib. Yeah, there's Conor fought himself. That's just what he does. That's what he's doing now. All his demons after that last loss. No, but it was Habib and Conor. Great atmosphere, great fight. We just finished some media interviews, went up to the open bar area, and I'm with one of my buddies who will remain nameless. And we see Miesha Tate over there, and we're just both huge fans. So we just go start talking to her. And one of my buddies is like, "Can I get you a drink?" And she goes, "Well, it's an open bar, right?" And he goes, "Yeah, all the better." And I just think that's a absolutely hilarious story. And she looked at him and she just told him to get lost. It was absolutely hilarious. Just the most up and down look from Miesha Tate, and just said, "No, get lost." It was awesome. Anyway, back to the card on Saturday. We got a Knockout Kings contest, and it is looking good. We got some heavy hitters on this card. And who do you like for the Knockout Kings contest? Because I'm actually going to go, I'll give you my first pick first. I like Gamera. He's taking on Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens has gone 5 fights without a win, been knocked out twice in that time. I think Gamera, he likes to hunt the takedowns. I think he takes him down, and I think he goes for the ground and pound finish.
Yeah, for me,
okay, sure. Next up, I like Billy Quantrillo. I think he's got excellent power. He's got excellent endurance. He's fighting Gabriel Benavidez, and Benavidez was knocked out. He has a pair of KO losses on his UFC resume. And my final pick is Miles Johns. This kid is raw talent, 11-1 record coming off of a KO victory, and Dos Santos has a couple of KO losses on his resume. I like Johns to come out fast and finish this fight.
I like it, man. I'm going to go a little contrarian relative to what you picked, but I do like it. So one is Francisco Figueiredo taking on Malcolm Gordon. I do think Figueiredo, while he's not the biggest hitter in this weight class, just watching how, Gordon could take damage. We saw it in just his last fight against McDermott. He got rocked and finished quickly there. There was even glimpses of that on the regional scene, fights that he went on to win. He still got rocked badly and almost finished. So while Figueiredo is a guy that is hard to trust at this point, Francisco Figueiredo, his brother, Davidson's brother, that is, he is the guy there that I do think he has not only knockout upside, but quick knockout upside, just based on the nature of how Gordon takes damage. I do like your pick on Johns. I do think he's live to get that knockout there, but I'm going to go pivot over to Khalid Taha. Taha's got a tremendous amount of power in his hands. We've seen that time and time again. The dude is a physical specimen. He's so strong and athletic, and he's a very good boxer. And he's taking on an opponent here in Sergey Morozov, who has been knocked out on the regional scene, has been rocked. Granted, if I'm doing an if-then statement in my head, I do think if Taha wins this fight, a good majority of that time is he's able to hurt Morozov. Maybe that leads to a knockout, maybe it doesn't, but I do think a good chunk of the time he's able to rock and hurt him. So I do like Taha there as a slight favorite to get the knockout. Lastly, a little bit of a chalkier option, but one that I do think comes through is Daniel Rodriguez. He's a massive favorite in this spot, and he's taking on a UFC newcomer in Preston Parsons, who I looked into, and honestly, Parsons looks pretty good. He looks like a good athlete, good wrestler, submission grappler, but there is levels to this game. It's been said time and time again. I wouldn't be surprised to see Parsons have a good showing, but Rodriguez is a guy we've seen. He's just so tough. He comes forward, throws a lot of hands, and he's got power in them. So I do think that this could be too much too soon for Parsons, even though I do like him as a prospect. So I'm going to go with Rodriguez, Taha, and Figueiredo to get the knockouts.
I really like the Rodriguez pick. Obviously, he was just in there and he put hands on Mike Perry, and Mike Perry he can throw bombs, so we know he can take a punch. I think those are three excellent picks. So on Monkey Knife Fight, folks, make sure that you select your buy on a minimum $5 entry. Right, that's the key. There is a minimum $5 entry to get in to win your share of the $2,500 in the Knockout Kings. And of course, you can select your buy-in whatever you want it to be. You just need the 3 knockouts. If you get all 3, I believe it pays 5 times. If you get 2, it pays 3 times. And if you get the 1, I think it pays 0.5. And that's all it is, folks. Knockout Kings on Monkey Knife Fight. AJ, thank you so much for joining us today to break down the card. Is there anything else, any other prospects that you want to touch on in UFC Vegas 31?
I'm just really looking forward to the event, man. I think we got, some really good fight of the night contenders here. I like Billy Quarantillo versus Gabriel Benitez. That has fireworks written all over it. And like we talked about off the top, I mean, even though this isn't not a pay-per-view card, it's just, as a fight fan, I look forward to this every single week. So whether fight night, pay-per-view, I love this stuff, man. And it was awesome doing this with you as always.
Well, let me just ask you one more question before we go. You just mentioned the Quarantillo fight. I had him in my Knockout Kings contest. You said it was going to be fireworks. How do you see that fight playing out?
I do like Benitez to win this fight. When I watch the two of them strike, I do think Benitez is the much better striker. Technically, I think he throws really hard and faster than Billy Q. And I love Billy Q's pace and his come forward nature, but he leaves himself very open to be hit. If you're a stats guy, 42% striking defense, Gavin Tucker boxed him up really good, was able to hurt him a couple times. And Benitez is not a guy you want to be hittable against. I mean, he'll kick that body, he'll kick those legs. From what I could tell, he's not doing this camp at least he's not doing a full camp at American Kickboxing Academy ahead of this fight like he usually does, but that doesn't take away how dangerous this guy is on the feet. I do think that Benitez could get a stoppage here. I know Billy Q is so tough, but he has been stopped in the past before. And I do think that the better fighter here on the feet in a fight that's probably going to be won or lost standing is Gabriel Benitez. So I do think that him being favored is justified.
Well, I like the upset with Quarantillo mainly because you mentioned it as a stats guy, right? Landing over 7 significant strikes per minute, that pace, I know you talked about it, it does leave him open, but he does only absorb just over 4. So he's still landing at a clip of approximately 2.5 more than he is absorbing. So while he is always walking forward and he does throw a lot, he does sometimes force a miss in there, and he does have the edge on the ground game if it does go to the ground. So I think that's where this fight could be decided. I think it's going to be a great fight, and I'm excited to be talking about this one next week going forward because it's the Southpaw versus the Orthodox, classic mixture of the styles. Well, I do think you're right on the sharper boxing belongs to Benitez, but I think Quarantillo and just the volume and the pace that he's going to push will be just too much to pace. Thank you so much, AJ, for joining us. For all the Monkey Knife Fighters chilling at home, thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, I'm Connor Rowntree. Remember to hit it hard.